Welcome to the HEARTS Entwined podcast. In this podcast, we'll be having discussions around the secrets which attract lasting, healthy, fulfilling relationships, creating a healthy mindset, and what women should know and understand about men. Introducing your host, Lyn Smith, the Queen of Hearts, relationship expert, trainer, speaker, and best-selling author of the Cupid's Bow technique. Lyn's mission is to have a positive impact in reducing divorce, domestic violence, and suicide.
Welcome to the HEARTS Entwined podcast. This is your host, Lyn Smith, the Queen of Hearts. And today, listeners, we're talking about a very hot, sensitive topic. It's all about betrayal and infidelity. And I've got a really great expert on today. His name is Luke Shillings. He's a relationship and infidelity coach. So warm welcome to you, Luke.
Thank you very much for having me here. Absolute pleasure.
You're very welcome. And it's nice to have some guys on the show because quite often most of my guests are female. So it's nice to get a male's perspective. And I usually really enjoy having a great conversation with my male coaches on the episode. So thank you very much for accepting the invitation.
Thank you too. And I'm looking forward to it.
All right. So betrayal and infidelity, Luke, how did you get into, being specifically niched around that particular area?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think for many people who have quite a specific niche in their field of work, often stems from some personal experience. And the same is true for me. I suppose it happened in a couple of different ways. If I reflect back on my life as a whole, actually, I was experienced to infidelity at a much younger age. My mother and father separated and divorced as a result of my father's affair when I was 4 years old, and of course that affected my upbringing in terms of how much I saw him. And although we've maintained a really great relationship, it obviously did have an impact, particularly as a young child. I didn't realize that then, some 35 years later, or maybe a bit more, I would be facing the same thing in my own relationship, my own marriage. I'd spent much of my sort of teenage years and early 20s sort of really believing that I didn't want to get married, mainly because I was terrified of the idea of divorce, because I'd seen what divorce looked like from the perspective of a child. And I thought, well, one safe way of dealing with that is to not get married, and then divorce is not an option. But anyway, as it happens, I met my wife to be, and some things happened in my brain that made me change my mind, and I proposed, and we got married and bought a house and had a couple of children. And 8 years into our relationship, or also 8 years into the marriage, closer to 12 years into the relationship, my wife had an affair. And the long story short, we went through a variety of things, but it essentially ended up in separation and then divorce. And I moved out of the family home. It was the most logical thing to do logistically. Of course, it was a very challenging emotional time, without shadow of a doubt, and there's lots of elements to it. She remained in a relationship with the affair partner, so there was a gradual integration with him and the children, which was, again, a very challenging time. He was actually a friend of ours as well, so that added an extra layer of betrayal, I suppose, in that sense. It wasn't just my wife. So that was sort of, I suppose, where I'm drawing from in terms of the personal perspective in which I used to help my clients and the people that I work with. But I also am always been fascinated about why people do the things they do, always been very introspective in that perspective. So when I sort of stumbled across the idea of coaching, which is completely, left field to what I'd been doing previously in my life, I've done a variety of things. The two things kind of fitted together quite well, because I'd actually healed independently of coaching myself. But then once I discovered it, I recognized so many elements that really I had applied, and actually the bits that I didn't would have helped. And if I could compile all those things together and help other people go through that period, in a more controlled sense, and maybe one that doesn't have to take forever and doesn't, you don't carry that burden with you for the rest of your life, and help people understand the concept of forgiveness and who that's for. And it just all fitted together. So that's what I decided to do, and I've gone at it full shot, so to speak.
I'm so sorry you had to experience that, because especially if the betrayal was not only your wife but a friend, that that was somebody you was knew and familiar with, that's sort of like a double whammy for you. So I'm so sorry to hear you went through that. It must have been a very challenging time for you, as you said. And
it was.
I suppose, like with most experts, though, our mess becomes our message, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
We become an expert once we learn how to heal ourselves from that. So what did you find helped you the most once you'd experienced that?
Yeah. So of course the initial period is very, tumultuous, and you're all over the place, and it's very, very challenging. And I thought I knew what the next period of my life looked like, and all of a sudden I didn't know what tomorrow looked like. So it felt very chaotic. And also I'd not really confided in anybody. I'd been sort of dealing with it all myself, through a combination of reasons, but predominantly paranoia, uncertainty, fear, and and all of these different things. And so when I finally did move out, and I was sort of faced with this blank canvas, if you like, of what the rest of my life was going to look like. Of course, obviously I'm still a father, and and I was really driven by wanting to maintain a good co-parenting relationship with their mother. Initially, it was just about getting clear on the things that I could control versus the things that I couldn't. The temptation to want to turn back time, to want to, take out revenge of sorts, particularly towards the affair partner, and just try and get back some control, because when you've had that experience and it feels like the rug's been pulled from underneath your feet, you feel completely devoid of control. And I think most human beings, whether we really have any control in life at all, is a philosophical question in itself. But we all at least tend to move through life with the idea that we have some control over our experience and our outcome. And we do that simply because, well, by evidence of the fact that we make decisions. We make a decision in the hope that the outcome of that decision is going to be more favorable to us rather than less favorable to us, whatever that looks like. But when you're in that emotional state and really, really struggling, it's very hard to see that with any clarity. So I'd never journaled before. I'd never written anything down. I'd always been very much in my head, very much a thinker. And I am a thinker. There's no two ways about it. And I know everybody thinks, of course, but I've always tried to analyze and try and understand and get to the bottom of some things rather than necessarily.
As I call it, analyze.
Yes, or analyze. Yes, yeah. So yes, exactly that. It's that really getting unnecessarily to a point, and of course, when the emotions are high, it just spirals out of control. So being able to sort of I didn't really recognize what I was doing at the time. It felt just like the right thing to do. And I just started to write down, what were the facts of the situation? Okay, I now no longer live with my children. I see them this number of times a week at these times. This is my current financial situation. This is the current relationship status, and really getting clear on all of these things. And then just releasing myself of the desire to control the things that I cannot control. And one thing I think I realized, I don't know why I hadn't noticed this before in my life, but it became so apparent then, more than anything, is that obviously we cannot control other people. And, that was very clearly evidenced by the fact that I wanted to be with my wife, and she had made some choices that didn't align with that. I couldn't change how she felt. I couldn't change how she thought. And despite even though she still cared deeply for me, the dynamic of the relationship had changed, and so that was very, very tough to handle. So just getting very clear on that, and then I could sort of temporarily push those things to one side. I don't mean ignore them, but just realize that actually, okay, if I spend all my time trying to fix the unfixable, I'm never going to move forward.
Yes.
If all of my energy is about trying to make her change or manipulate the situation or try and use the kids as pawns, and I never did that, but these thoughts and ideas come up in your head, and I certainly witness it in some of my clients' stories and some of the the groups and things that I'm part of. and my friends' stories over the years as well. You see this all the time and it makes sense because you're just trying to get something back. You're trying to regain some control, and you'll sort of go to almost any length to do that. And so, yeah, I think that writing stuff down, getting that out of my head. I now use a process called a thought download, which is like a brief format of a journal, if you like, where I literally I consider thoughts as being sentences in our mind. So something happens in the world, we give it an interpretation, we give it some meaning, and then it's essentially just getting those thoughts out and writing them down on paper. Whether it be in bullet point format or whatever's most comfortable. You only need to spend a few minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then you can actually look at them, and they're looking back at you. It's no longer spinning around in your head like a cloud or a storm of sorts. It's clear, it's in ink, it's on paper, and then you can start to question that. And it's like, well, is that thought really true? Do I really believe, like, if I'm really honest with myself, is that really true? Is that really accurate? And if so, how do I feel about that? And if not, well, how else could I look at it? What other perspective could I look at it from? So yeah, that's kind of where I started naturally, and then as I've sort of gone through my journey over the last, several years, it's been reinforced with everything that I do and in my coaching as well.
Yeah, that's a great tip, to do some journaling. And I often think, sometimes you can also do an exercise that is another writing exercise, whereby you can write a letter to your partner, and you can be as brutal as you want, because it's a letter you're not going to send. It's like about in the song "Letters I've Written, Never Meaning to Send." That again, gets all those angst and feelings out rather than in, because if we suppress stuff, that can make us ill, can't it? And have a negative impact on ourselves. And or equally, if we do get it out later on, it might be in the a conflict situation where we're lashing out at people that haven't hurt us, because we needed to get it out in some other form, and it's not been a healthy way to do it. So I love the idea that you've suggested there in journal format.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's important to, and maybe I didn't really pay enough attention to it throughout my life. Maybe I would fall into that stereotypical man. I don't mean that I didn't have feelings. No, I wasn't aware of my feelings, but I probably spent a lot of my life just pushing them behind me, just sort of burying them out of the way, not really paying attention to them. It's like, I can, goodness forbid the phrase man up, but it's like, get over it, move on, suppress is probably the best sort of, word to describe that kind of behavior when it comes to our body. But of course, there's so much within our body that, I was speaking to someone just this morning, our body keeps the score. We have an experience in life, and it leaves an imprint of sorts. And then if we're then triggered in the future through any given situation or scenario, our brain wants to just overcome it. It's like, I just know it's not ready to pay attention to it. So it tries to go past it. It tries to distract us in some way. Maybe it'll seek some unhealthy habit, whether it becomes, scrolling too much on your phone, or going down the pub, or turning to substances, or whatever the behavior is. It's anything it can to get away from feeling, because feeling's scary, because we're never taught really how to feel. We all are familiar with the idea of happy, mad, sad, glad, and these sort of loose forms of emotions. But of course, it's such a complex mosaic of potential emotions that we can experience. And if we suppress those, and this was particularly prevalent for me because I was such a logical thinker, very in my head, that you can't win. Basically, if you try and solve all the problems cognitively, you can't do it, because the felt self, the emotional experience is just too powerful. So we then have to pay attention to the body, and we have to pay attention to ourselves and really understand what's going on, and actually start to offer some compassion and some understanding and some kindness. And I heard somebody say once, it's not my words, but very prevalent, is, treat yourself like somebody you really, really care about. And most people don't.
That's true.
We put other people first. Yeah.
I mean, earlier on in the conversation, you mentioned the word forgiveness, and that's not necessarily, I suppose, about forgiving unacceptable behavior. But, what would your words be about that word
Yeah,
forgiveness in relation to helping somebody that might be listening to this that can resonate with your story?
sure. Yeah. So, I mean, forgiveness, I think that the default opinion of forgiveness is it's all about letting the other person off the hook. I think that's how it's how I interpreted it for many, many years. It's that idea that we're condoning it, maybe, or, we're saying that it's acceptable. But of course, that's just not true. It's not about the other person, first of all. And most importantly, it's not about the other person. If we think about what forgiveness is, or maybe if we flip it around, if we think about what withholding forgiveness is, because that's ultimately what we're doing. If I'm not going to forgive somebody, then I am withholding forgiveness from that person. But to withhold forgiveness, what does that do? Well, it doesn't affect the other person, first of all. It doesn't really, whether they're bothered or not is irrelevant, particularly if it's somebody who's now gone off and, think about me trying to forgive my wife. Well, my wife was in another relationship. Me saying I forgive you probably wouldn't have meant a great deal at that particular point in time. The only person that was being affected by withholding this forgiveness was me. And I liken it a little bit to carrying, a big sack over your shoulder and you dragging this weight with you, but you're the one dragging it. You're the one carrying it. And you're just maybe too afraid to let go because of the association that we have with the idea that it's letting them off the hook or that we're some way in condoning it. But actually, that's not true at all. We're not condoning anything. Betrayal, I think it's fairly safe to say, is not a good way to, plan out and function in relationships. It's always going to have a negative impact. And so we're not saying that it's okay. But if you are going to continue to withhold and you're the one that's feeling all the pain and the discomfort, well, actually, it's only you holding on to that. And that's all it is. And okay, it's not just a case of necessarily clicking your fingers and letting go, but at least realizing that you have the control in that situation. It's not about the other person changing. It's not about the other person, apologizing 1,000 times. I'm not saying those things don't come into play at all, but that's not where the core of it is. It's the fact that you're holding on to it and you are the one currently not letting go. I was speaking with a friend the other day and he gave a great analogy. I think he probably got it from somewhere else as well. And it's this idea that it's a bit like holding two pieces of coal that are glowing hot. And they're glowing hot because you want to throw them at the person who's betrayed you. You're angry at that person. And the idea is you want to throw them. But the problem is you're either not in the right position or this, that, and and all that's actually happening is your hands are just getting burnt. You're the one getting hurt by that situation. And it's exactly the same thing. It's about recognizing that the only person creating the discomfort for you really is you. And
absolutely,
it's tough to grasp. I get it. But it's very freeing once you realize that you've got the control in that situation, especially given that we've just come through a situation where we feel like we've lost all the control.
It's about taking your power back, isn't it? And not allowing any perpetrators or somebody you perceive as who has betrayed you to have all the power in the dynamic.
Exactly.
Because, once you take your power back, you're instantly elevating yourself and start to feel better about yourself and know that, you can start working on if there's any self-worth issues or not feeling good enough issues, that you are worthy and you are good enough and you do deserve love. And one of the ways that we can live our lives going forward is not through exerting any sort of revenge in inverted commas, but the revenge, if you want to exert it, would be living a successful life in many respects, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the best revenge you could possibly get, if you like, if that is something that sort of drives you in some way, like you feel like you have to hang on to that idea of, it's like you say, it's about releasing the expectation on the other person or releasing their expectation to change. Obviously, again, this is dependent on what the dynamic is. Obviously, if you're staying in the relationship, then there are certain things that, it's reasonable to have certain boundaries in place, of course. In fact, it's essential to have certain boundaries in place about what you might expect of the unfaithful partner to do to help play a role in the reconciliation. However, it's not just about the unfaithful partner. You, as the betrayed person, it doesn't mean you just get to sit back, fold your arms, and wait for them to make everything right. The reality is, and this is, I see this all the time, is when I first start working with someone, one of the first things they want to do, I was like, well, what do you want? And they're like, I just want to turn back time, Luke. I just want to go back to how it was before. I'm like, okay, so let's go there. And then we start exploring, we start getting a real detailed description of what it was like before. And okay, I'm not saying it was terrible, but all of a sudden you start to recognize these little bits of information that actually maybe we weren't communicating that well. Actually thinking about it, I did spend a lot of time just, sat on the sofa watching TV, not really connecting, Yeah, actually my wife did used to say these things and maybe I wasn't really paying attention. Maybe I could have done it a bit differently. Or maybe it was, she was always, making these demands and I was interpreting that as her not loving me or not caring about me. So I got defensive and just put up a wall. And, and the point is when we start reflecting back, we recognize that actually maybe it wasn't quite as all rosy and perfect as we perceived it to be. So what can we learn from that? And how can we use that to maybe try and rebuild the relationship going forward? Or B, if you're not in the position or you've chosen not to remain in the relationship where the betrayal happened, so that you're not carrying those same resentments and those same bitterness into a new relationship, how can you reflect on that to, like you say, start to, take that, build that self-worth and empower yourself into creating much more successful relationships going forward.
What about yourself, Luke? I mean, if you don't mind sharing, what would you say you took ownership for in terms of your own responsibility that contributed maybe to that situation happening?
Yeah, it is a good question. And it's something that I have reflected on a lot. Now, on the one hand, I would say that I was, by all normal measurements, a good husband. Like I was not abusive. I didn't drink. I was caring and loving and maybe not. I was employed. Yeah. I maybe could have done a bit more housework from time to time, but I wasn't devoid of it. It was not like I didn't do anything. I didn't just turn up. I didn't just get home from work, expect the tea on the table. And I've never been that kind of person. Was I faultless? No, of course I wasn't. But so when I think back, it's interesting. There were signs that maybe things weren't as good as they could have been for much longer than I initially realized. And only very subtle and not very, nothing intense, nothing really blatantly obvious, if I'm honest. But clearly there had been a slight disconnect. It's a bit like, I think of it a little bit like, it's a bit like imagining that two trains set on parallel tracks set off at the day you meet your partner and imagining that they stay exactly the same distance apart the whole time. But of course, in reality, that would be pointless because both trains get to the same destination. And obviously, in the world of trains, we tend to go to different direct destinations. And sometimes the trains will come apart and sometimes their tracks might cross back over. And it's a little bit like this in relationships. You get this like parting and then there might be a bit of a cross or there might be a permanent part. But if we're not actually paying attention to that and not communicating that enough, then it becomes a bit of a problem. What I noticed particularly was my expectations that I had for my partner. So, for example, I've always been quite, I'm sure you can probably just tell by the way I'm talking, quite open, quite comfortable with exploring how I'm thinking and feeling, not afraid of difficult conversations, probably always go a few 2 layers deeper than I need to, but it's quite self-fulfilling. Whereas my ex-wife was not like that. She was much more of a bit more, I suppose, a bit more black and white, I guess, it's probably the fairest way of putting it. And for example, if we had some disagreement and I wanted to work through that problem, because my idea was, I'm a problem solver. I want to fix it. I want to sort it all out now. I don't want it to drag out. I don't want to deal with that feeling of it just overhanging all the time. I just want to solve the problem. And I feel comfortable that if we have this conversation, we can communicate in such a way that that problem can get solved. However, that wasn't the way that she processed. She would she would need a little bit of time. Maybe it was an hour, maybe it was overnight, whatever it was, depending on the individual thing. But I always felt quite a lot of resentment. It's like, well, I wanted her to be different. I wanted that to change. And it's like I wouldn't really relax into that. There's again, this resentment building up subtly over time because she wasn't the way I thought that she should be, so to speak. When I did reflect back, I realized actually that was just my expectation. Because the reality was, and the evidence was, that she was being exactly who she always had been. She was, and she was just being her true self in that sense. But I was expecting her to be different. The moment I really realized that and just released that, and it did. I was like, oh yeah, I thought that she had to be different. There was some rule in the universe that said she had to be different, and of course it wasn't. It was just my perception because it didn't align with my own expectations. The moment I did that, everything changed. Okay, maybe we could argue too late, but like the relationship that we have now is completely different as a result of that. And we were able to overcome all kinds of challenges because, even obviously once we separated and divorced, we were still saw each other very regularly because of the kids. And that was really important to both of us. And then actually several years down the line, we actually got back together. So it kind of was really important that we were very clear on what was different from before and after. So yeah, and obviously there's other things, but that's probably the most significant one that stood out to me.
So are you and your wife back together again now?
We are, yes, but we are divorced and we don't live together. So it's not like I had ever imagined it to be, but it works really well. And the routine that we had with the kids whilst we were, separated and divorced, or obviously we're still divorced, but whilst we were separated, was maintained. We just kept that exactly the same. And yeah, when we first got back together, we trialed it for a period, sort of in quite discreetly, just to make sure that we were in alignment in terms of like, why are we doing this? Not doing it just for the kids, not doing it just for logistics, not doing it for money, not doing it because of the house, not doing it for any of those things. It had to be because it was something that we both wanted. And, we'd both spent a couple of years or more separate and single by that point. And and we've started, I suppose, what you could call like 2.0, like the second version of our relationship. But obviously, it does have the advantages of the fact that we share the same children as well.
Yeah, well, congratulations to you both on doing that, and let's touch wood and hope it progresses along nicely onwards and upwards from here. So, well done on that.
Thank you.
And Luke, thank you very much for having this heartfelt conversation and sharing so much of your own story around betrayal and infidelity. How can our audience connect with you should they want to reach out?
Yeah, sure. So there's two main ways. One is through my website, which is lifecoachluke.com, all one word. Or you can listen to me and my voice much more on my podcast, which is called After the Affair, which is available on all the main podcast platforms.
Excellent. Thank you. And any other words of wisdom that you'd like to, or any tips that you'd like to leave the audience with around this very heartfelt, sensitive subject of betrayal and infidelity?
Trust. A bit like forgiveness. To begin with, we think that trust is all about the other person. And, when our trust has been broken, it feels very external. But it's very quickly we start to realize that actually we've lost trust in ourselves. We've lost that trust in our ability to judge and make assessments. And then we start to second guess everything. So before you can really start to rebuild trust in another person, whether it be the same person that betrayed you or in a new relationship, working on trusting yourself is almost essential. And once you start to rebuild that trust with yourself, and there's various ways that you can do that, but once you start to really focus on that idea of rebuilding that trust with yourself first, it becomes much easier and much safer and much more comfortable and much more fulfilling to then extend that trust out to others again.
Thank you so much. That's brilliant advice. And thank you again for being so vulnerable and courageous enough to share a lot of your personal information and experiences.
Thank you. Thank you again for having me.
So it just leaves me to say that true love starts with opening our hearts. And until next time, goodbye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Hearts Entwined podcast. You can follow Lyn via the Facebook group 2 Hearts Entwined, or search Lyn Smith inspirational speaker at LinkedIn or email lyn@hearts-entwined.com. That's LYN@hearts-entwined.com. Remember, true love starts with opening our hearts.